Hey, what is going on guys? Welcome back to another PS4 and PS5 jailbreak news update. Once again, we've got lots of topics to dive into here in this video. So first of all, we've got GoldHEN. We have a new version of GoldHEN coming. It might be out by the time this video goes out. It's going to be GoldHEN version 2.4b17.4. So this new version looks like it's not really going to be adding any new features. It is just adding support for firmwares that were previously unsupported. So we're talking 10.50, 10.70 and 10.71. So Sistro's already released the new GoldHEN Stage 2 loader version 1.03 for loading this new version of GoldHEN, which will support these other firmwares. So that is now being released on GitHub. It was released yesterday. It says here that the next versions are going to be 9.03. So once this new version of GoldHEN releases, the next target firmware for support will be 9.03. So that will be what he'll be working on next. So that's what we've got there. So expect all of the projects, all of the Pwn loaders to be updated. So all of the Windows loaders, the LuckFox loader, the PyPwn project, all of that stuff is going to be updated to include this new Stage 2 loader and add support for 10.50, 10.70 and 10.71. Most likely all of the AliExpress Pwn devices will also be updated, like the P4 tool and all of that stuff. So you can expect a lot of these projects to be updated to include this Stage 2 loader very soon. And of course the new GoldHEN payload when it releases. So moving on from that, the other big piece of news that we've got recently was this post from Zeko that created quite a stir in the scene, where he said that we might have a semi-permanence on PS4 and PS5 soon. When somebody asks what that means, he says, like custom firmware. Now, unfortunately, some people took that to mean, hey, we're getting custom firmware on PS4 and PS5 soon. Just for the headlines, I guess. So of course, when he says custom firmware, he's talking about the fact that custom firmware is loaded on boot, whereas currently with the PS4 and PS5 exploits, we have to reload the jailbreak every time we reboot the console. So the idea of having a semi-permanence for PS4 and PS5 means being able to have the exploit basically running on boot, or have it run on boot so that you don't have to manually, run the exploit by going into like the web browser. Maybe it'll just load when the console is actually booting, so it will be essentially loaded by the time you get to the home screen, or maybe you just wait on the home screen for a few seconds and then the exploit will be loaded. So that is the idea behind this. He wasn't literally meaning it's custom firmware, he was just meaning it's like custom firmware in the sense that the exploit can be loaded when the console is booted instead of having to manually load the exploit on every reboot. So there was some more information provided by etaHEN on this, who seems to be one of the primary developers of this. So etaHEN has posted a lot of posts about this, so we'll go over all of them and then we'll kind of discuss at the end. So etaHEN says that it's a bolt-on feature for existing exploits. It's not really an exploit itself so much as a misconfiguration, allowing certain things they shouldn't. The bolt-on itself is patchable on PS5 for sure. PS4, there should always be a workaround if they patch it. It's essentially multiple separate components working in tandem to poke each other and overwrite system settings to keep certain things set up a certain way for certain unintended behavior. For exploits that don't require any hardware, it doesn't need additional hardware. However, the exploit needs to have a WebKit entry point, so the exFAT hack exploit will work with hardware, should work with existing hardware with new software flashed to it, but the PPPoE exploit will not work with it. It prevents DNS hijacking and updates on boot. I only found one way to uninstall it on accident. I may have a way to prevent that even, but I haven't tested it yet. Beyond yanking the HDD, resetting to factory settings, etc., you basically need to intend to remove it to disable it. If your console has internet available, the bolt-on will automatically update if changes are published to the GitHub repo. I'll likely add settings to it in the PS4 settings so people can configure it how they like. It works on PS4 to the latest firmware. The elements that allow it to function were tested on PS5, so it should work there as well. It was not tested as a whole on PS5 because I want to finish the PS4 implementation first. Because of this, I don't know how/when I want to release it. I'll probably wait, bundle it with a different unreleased project when that's ready, so there'll be a big release all at once. Utility-wise, it's great, but it's not a huge change if you already use a hardware device/caching. Don't make this seem something bigger than it is. It's not some boot chain code execution so much as doing some tricky stuff to make things seem like they persist through a reboot. That's about all I'll say for now. Now, etaHEN did go on to actually post a little bit more about this yesterday, So it's not custom firmware, no features of the exploit/hen change, just how it's launched. 5.05 to 7.55, all software, no external device needed. 9.00 needs an external device like an ESP32S2. 9.03 to 11.0 does not work currently because the PPPoE exploit does not use a WebKit entry point. There's a certain reason you'd use it on 9.00 with an ESP device. I can't really say more about it without disclosing stuff I don't want to talk about yet. Hopefully we get another WebKit plus software kernel exploit chain for the PS4 now that we're basically at a soft end of life. So that was the whole spiel there from Al-Azov about this semi-permanence. So a few things to take away there. Works up to the latest firmware on PS4, which of course does not mean that it's a new exploit that works on the latest firmware. It just means that if there is a new exploit that worked up to the latest firmware, this would work with it to make it semi-permanent. And then of course it should also work on PS5, but the focus is on getting a polished version to release on PS4 before looking into a PS5 implementation. So it should work on PS5, but it's not been looked into yet until the PS4 version is done. And it is patchable on PS5, seemingly permanently patchable on PS5, whereas on PS4, if they try to patch it, there should always be a workaround to get it working again. Also, once it releases, it will automatically update if you have an internet connection on the PS4 with its own custom settings page to configure it manually, and it will likely be included in the release of another project, but it could be a while before that releases, although some components of this could be released earlier. And of course, it does seem to be pretty persistent because uninstalling it seems to be quite difficult. You have to either factory reset the console or pull out the hard drive, something like that. Although I'm sure in the final version, Al-Azov will include some kind of uninstaller if you wanted to remove it at some point. And as Al-Azov says, this is a bolt-on solution for existing exploits. Specifically, it only works with exploits that are loaded through WebKit, where the WebKit exploit is the entry point to load the kernel exploit. That is what's required, so that's why 5.05 to 7.55 are supported, and 9.00 is supported, but it does require an ESP32S2 or a Raspberry Pi, because of course the 9.00 exploit, although it's loaded through the WebKit, it does require a USB drive with the exFAT hack image on it to be plugged into the console to initialize the kernel exploit. So in order for that to work, you do need to have the USB, so an ESP32S2 or Raspberry Pi can emulate the USB to inject the image when it's needed, and that's why one of those devices is required there. And then of course 9.03 to 11.0 will not work because the exploit's not loaded through the WebKit, it's loaded through PPPoE. So it's a completely different way of loading the exploit, so that's why this does not work with it. And of course the PS5 jailbreak on 3.x to 4.x is done through a WebKit entry point, and it does not require any additional hardware, so theoretically it should also be supported once Al-Azov gets around to it. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how well this works. Is the exploit actually loaded as soon as you boot into the home screen with this? Or is it more like, you know, it's just running it in the background, or automatically launching the web browser and loading it? Because we've kind of seen that before with ESP32S2s, because they can emulate a keyboard or emulate a controller like a rubber ducky, and then they can use that to, you know, manually launch the web browser and load the exploit for you. But that's always been a bit of a gimmick, so hopefully this is something a bit better than that. So yeah, that's all I'll say on this for now, because we don't really have any additional information on this yet, but you know, something to look forward to once it releases. So in addition to all of that, Zeko has also put out another piece of news here saying that there seems to be another separate free list corruption coming to PS4 and PS5, but the team behind it doesn't seem to want to disclose it so soon, not even to HackerOne. It is possible that this exploit only comes to end-of-life PS4 times. I feel like every year we hear about these end-of-life exploits, that there's some exploit being kept back for end-of-life. Hopefully one of those rumors is actually true, because it would make sense to at least keep one kernel exploit back for end-of-life, so that there's no more system updates coming out that would patch any exploits. And at that point, if you release a new kernel exploit, then all PS4s for the end of time will be jailbreakable. Doesn't matter what firmware they're on, because the latest firmware is jailbreakable, so they can be updated to the latest firmware and be jailbroken, and there'll never be any new system updates to patch it. So hopefully that is true. I'm sure there probably is some kernel exploits, or maybe some even bigger exploits that are being kept back for end of life, because if they release them now, it could cause certain legal trouble for whoever releases it. Whereas if they wait for end of life, when Sony no longer cares, then they'd be more likely to release that kind of thing. But this is another exploit now, supposedly, that may be being kept back for end of life, as the hackers currently don't want to disclose it, and they don't even want to report it to HackerOne. Now, in the last video, we discussed a potential 11.50 exploit, as the flow received another $10,000 bounty on HackerOne. Now, although it does appear, all the signs seem to point towards this being a new kernel exploit for the PS4, which would result in a new jailbreak up to 11.50. You can watch that video for all the evidence that I present in that particular video pointing towards that eventuality. So once again, we have Zeko, this time casting some doubt on the fact that this will result in a new jailbreak. So Zeko here says, you guys can stop waiting for the flow's exploits, you'll be disappointed otherwise. When somebody asks if it's for PS4, he says that's not the issue here. And then of course somebody also asks, is it not a kernel exploit? And he says, I will not confirm nor deny that statement. So, you know, if of course Zeko does have some kind of contact or is in communication with the flow himself, he may know more than we do. It does seem strange though, every other $10,000 bounty that the flow has received has all been for kernel exploits, although there was one $20,000 bounty that the flow received for 5 separate exploits for the PS4 and the PS5 that could cause kernel panics, and was thought originally that it would be able to load backup games, which didn't turn out to be the case. But that resulted, those were 5 exploits affecting the PS4 and the PS5, which resulted in a $20,000 bounty, but I don't believe there was any kernel exploit involved in that. So there is some precedent for these high bounties being awarded for lesser exploits when there are multiple exploits all combined in one report. So it could be that. Some other evidence to maybe support Zeko's theory is the fact that of course, the flow has not made any statement about this report, whereas with the last report that resulted in the 11.0 jailbreak, he warned people not to update beforehand around the exact same time that he actually made the report. He does do that quite often with new exploits, but not for every single one. So it's not unprecedented that the flow has not, warned people about it beforehand, especially when there's already been a recent jailbreak released. So yeah, again, it is most likely going to be a kernel exploit just based on, the evidence so far, but Zeko is definitely casting some doubt on that, and, he may have some additional information that we're not privy to. So yeah, anyway, just wanted to go ahead and point that out. So some more news with the PS5 for etaHEN stability. So Lightning Mods made this post here saying that after conducting tests on my 4.50 and 4.03 PS5, I've identified an issue impacting etaHEN users on 4.5x. Certain games, including Red Dead Redemption 2, may cause the console to freeze or crash when the ELF loader and/or cheats plugin is running. To prevent these issues, I recommend that users on 4.5x stop all plugins via the etaHEN toolbox prior to launching affected games until a permanent fix is implemented. So yes, there's a lot of people who have been identifying more instability issues with the latest version of etaHEN, and the majority of those users tend to be on 4.50. Obviously, there's still some general instability issues that affect, I think, all firmwares on etaHEN, but it seems that people were crashing a lot more on 4.50 and 4.5x, and now Lightning Mods has actually purchased a console on 4.50, so he's able to more easily investigate these issues and has identified a problem. So if you are on 4.50 or 4.51 and you're having these crashing issues on etaHEN, disable the ELF loader and cheats plugin, see if that helps stability. If it doesn't, you can still just use the kstuff payload until a new version of etaHEN is released, which will hopefully be a more stable version for those firmwares that are affected. So anyway, that is basically it for this update. Hope you guys enjoyed it or found the information useful. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. And once again, I'll hopefully see you guys in the next video.